Welcome to Viewpoints, brought to you by Equiture, the leading provider of public safety software and training. My name is Cherie Bartram, and I will be your host today. A little bit about us before we get started. We are an international leader in public safety training and technology with products geared toward providing tools to help responders stay safe and educated. For those of you who are new, we offer monthly podcasts with a variety of guests geared toward public safety topics, as well as monthly webinars and a diverse offering of training courses. Today on our show, we have the privilege of speaking with Kris Inman. Kris brings 30 years of 911 experience to his training, speaking, and instruction as the Director of Program Development for the Healthy Dispatcher. If you've never heard of Healthy Dispatcher, you should look them up when we're done here. A noted presenter, Kris has delivered stand-out educational sessions, keynotes, motivational talks, and yoga instruction to dispatchers across the country. He has also served as an adjunct professor, teaching popular classes in communication and public safety leadership at both universities. Drury, did I say that right, Kris?
Drury.
Okay,
Yeah.
Drury University and Missouri State University, where he was honored with a University Teaching Award in 2012 or 2021. Prior to joining the Healthy Dispatcher, Kris served for 28 years at Springfield-Greene County, Missouri 911, working his way up from call taker to dispatcher to communication training officer, CTO, to supervisor, to training manager, and then director. He holds a Master of Art in Communication and a Bachelor of Science in Electronic Media from Missouri State University. He is also a registered yoga instructor. And there's this one last thing that I really want to touch on because it holds a special place for me personally. Kris is an MS activist with the Multiple Sclerosis Society and has been instrumental as a leader for MS campaigns for the city of Springfield. And Kris, I want to thank you for your contributions to 911 profession as well as the health and healing of others.
First of all, thank you for having me, Cherie. It's a real honor to be here. But no thanks necessary there. Anything that I do, there has to be a passion project for me. And 911 is a passion, and certainly MS, the society, is a passion. My wife was diagnosed in 2020. And as a fixer of things, it was the first thing with someone I love more than anyone in the world that I couldn't fix in any way. So I reached out to the MS Society, hat in hand, right after her diagnosis and asked them to just put me to work. I said, you guys want me to come sweep floors? You want me to work concessions at events? I don't care what it is. I just need to put this, whatever this is, I've got something I need to do. I need to put it into something. So got the great opportunity from the fine folks at the MS Society to start getting involved, and it's really snowballed from there. So it's been a real privilege to get to be a part of it.
That's cool. I've mentioned a plethora of topics that you're well versed in. So our audience may be wondering what we're going to be discussing today. So we do have a treat for you. We're going to be we're going to be talking about how to treat others in the workplace and how that impacts us. Kris, on a side note, I did have to laugh a little internally when I saw that you retired in 2023. So how's that retirement working out for you?
Cherie, I think like you, and you and I talked a little bit here before we got started, like you, I'm not really sure what retirement feels like. I don't know. I know what it feels like to be retired from my 911 center, but I started with Adam and folks at the Healthy Dispatcher literally the next day. I was on a plane to Colorado to do some consulting. So I don't know. I haven't let off the gas yet. In fact, as we go on here, I'm just pressing down on the gas a little harder, it seems, every day. But again, I don't mean to sound like I'm complaining, because I love the work. It's a passion, as I mentioned. And right now I'm at the stage of life where if it's not a passion, I'm not interested. If I don't wake up every day just with my hair on fire because I get a chance to do this, then it's not a thing that I want to do. So in answer to your question, one day perhaps I'll know what it's like to be retired, but that day is not today.
Very good. I echo that sentiment. I mentioned when I was introducing you that during your tenure as a dispatcher, while you and your team have experienced significant achievements, can you highlight some of those achievements for our audience?
Yeah, sure. Gosh, going back, I started in 1994. So, departmentally, industry-wide, the achievements writ large, we could spend the next 5-6 hours talking about, but I'll just kind of narrow down to when I became the director my last 3 years. One of the things that was really important to us, to my team and I, was to create career laddering positions so that people waiting for a step up to open up would have the opportunity not only to move up and increase their pay a little bit, but also to kind of sharpen their skills. So we were able to really put our nose to the grindstone and open up 15 career laddering positions for the department. My folks worked really hard on that. We were able to effect over 20% worth of pay raises during my 3 years at the helm. One of the big moments for us, once we were recognized by the state of Missouri as public safety first responders, which I wish the states that haven't done that yet would get going on it, and certainly I wish nationally that would occur. That's another discussion we could have for the next many hours. We reached out to our state retirement folks to ask them, hey, we're public safety now, so do we get to retire like public safety folks do? Because it's where I'm from, you retired like all other city employees. You weren't recognized as public safety, so you can get to retire at 55. So we kind of put our nose to the grindstone on that as well. And after they came back to us, they said, yeah, in fact, you can do that. So we were able to effect 55 retirement age right before I left for folks in Springfield. And to people who would look at that and say, well, what's the difference in 55 and 60? Why is that a big deal? If you haven't spent a year on a dispatch floor and felt what that year feels like, I can promise you, and dispatchers watching this, you know what I'm talking about. 5 years early in dispatch is a lifetime. So we were super excited to get that done. But I think the most important thing that occurred while I was there was just, and I was driven by this, to put the spotlight on my people and the work they're doing and all the stuff that dispatchers do that no one ever sees or no one ever hears about. And even though it is our best intention to make sure that everyone hears about the great work, we just don't often get it known. So I really worked hard in my years as director to put a spotlight on my people, not that I did anything. They were already doing incredible work, just weren't always getting noticed for it. During my 3 years, I had 13 employees recognized for state and local awards. So that, to me, of all the things, is the most important, the most impressive, because leaders come and go, and I don't mean to diminish great leadership. Leaders come and go. Great work by dispatchers continues. Whether you see it or hear about it, it's happening. And unfortunately, we work in an industry where if you make a mistake, we're all going to hear about that. And sometimes we hear about it on the news, and sometimes the only time you hear about 911 is if somebody screws something up. But what you don't realize if you're not in this industry is they're doing the right thing 1,000 times, and sometimes to heroic proportions. People don't hear about it. They don't notice it. So that was a huge, huge thing for me in leadership, was to try and get my folks, the great work they're already doing, noticed. So that, to me, is something I look back on with the most pride, because I had great people, still great people working there. And anytime we've got 911 folks getting recognized, that's a good thing.
That's great. I like how you said that. I've always thought, you can have a great leader, but if you have, it's the people, really, that make the organization. If you have a great leader with great vision, it's still going to be the people that are going to drive that vision.
Yeah, it 100% is. And, we talk a lot in this industry about technology, and we talk a lot in this industry about a lot of stuff that doesn't have anything to do with people. But at the end of the day, this is a people-driven industry. 911 is about its people, and it seems that they are what we talk about the least. They are what we publicize the least, when in fact it's the people of 911 who are leading everything. None of the other stuff is possible without the incredible work being done by 911 dispatchers around this country. And you think about it, Cherie, what this industry asks of them and throws at them. I need you to be perfect. Well, I need you to be even more perfect than perfect. You cannot screw up. You simply can't. I need you to work 50, 55-hour weeks. Like to tell you that they're going to end, but they probably won't. I'd like you to continue to train new people, many of whom aren't going to make it, but you need to keep doing it. Oh, and you want an end to all this? There's no end to all this. In fact, we're going to throw even more work at you in the midst of all of this. And at the same time, probably not going to pay you exactly what you're worth. So we are asking everything from people in 911 while recognizing them for very little of it. And that's what really drives me at this stage of my career with the Healthy Dispatcher, is the opportunity to not only go out and be among these folks and do what I can in any small way to help them, but to promote the people of 911, to talk about what they're doing, and to make people who don't know our industry know that 911 may be seamless to you. You may not ever have to use it, but it takes great, dedicated people who persevere through unimaginable stuff to make it what it is. And so that's what really drives me now.
Well, so speaking of driving you have 1-minute training tidbits for the Healthy Dispatcher. Can you tell me what inspires those topics?
Yeah, we call that the THD Training Minute, and it's something that I put out every Wednesday for the Healthy Dispatcher. And essentially, it's a minute-ish, just a little bite-sized tidbit of training. We didn't want to present another 30-minute something or other that you had to sit and take notes for, but rather just something maybe you could watch right before your shift, or you could just take a peek at on a break. And none of it is particularly revelatory. I'm not throwing information out there that's making dispatchers say, oh, how could I have never heard this fantastic? It's usually stuff you know on some level. It's just the opportunity to remind dispatchers, who are the canniest, smartest people you'll meet, just to remind them of common sense topics that they need to sometimes be reminded of, and I'm always driven by, well, what would I have needed? Especially as I got into my 5th, 6th, 7th year, and I was getting a little jaded on the dispatch floor, maybe a little bit, same. I kind of went into autopilot mode, and I needed a bit of a tweak. What would I have needed to just remind me, hey, what this is a really special job that you're doing, and it's really important that you're doing it, and you need to remember that you need to be in the moment when you're doing it. So little tips, tricks, tidbits, just to remind dispatchers of the importance of what they do, to kind of help them stay sharp, that kind of thing. It doesn't cost any money. I know that there are a handful of agencies out there that are actually using these for their folks pre-shift, which I think is awesome. But that's what they're for. They're not from some great mountain of wisdom where, Kris was almost 30 years in a center, so listen to the perfect wisdom. It's not any of that, because I don't have perfect wisdom, but I do have the benefit of crystal clear hindsight. And so in using that, I'm able to kind of just float some little reminders that I think we can all use from time to time.
Okay. Well, and you and Adam recently debuted a podcast called THD Talks. What inspired you to start that up?
That is a labor of love for us. So we were doing a monthly kind of meet with folks in the industry called THD Talks. And what that was the last Friday of every month, we would just invite anyone in a 911 leadership position to join us for 30 minutes or so to just visit about topics that maybe were troubling them. A chance for dispatchers to just get together and visit. It wasn't recorded. It was a safe space, if you will, where you could just talk about issues and maybe find out if someone out there is solving the issues that you're having. But that can be cumbersome to ask dispatchers to do another thing, or to ask leaders to add another thing to their list. You've already got everything going on. So we kind of have segued that from its original plan into more of a podcast scenario where Adam and I are just kind of visiting. And the big thing for Adam and I, and it's a loose kind of topic sort of podcast. It may be an interview one week. It may be just Adam and I loosely talking the next week. But it's kind of off the cuff. It's unfiltered. I think there are a lot of folks doing a great job with a lot of different podcasts in our industry. So Adam and I, if we were going to do a podcast, we wanted to do something that really doesn't exist. And so this is an opportunity for us to just kind of let our hair down a little bit, have a little bit of fun. For example, the first episode was Adam and I telling stories from the road, just silly things that have happened to us, unfiltered. It's just more for fun, which is not to say there won't occasionally be things to learn on there. There may be, but we're kind of bombarding the 911 industry with learning stuff. Not there's anything wrong with that. I'm a huge proponent of training.
Right.
But at times, maybe we just want to just listen and have a laugh and just enjoy. And that's ostensibly what that podcast is about. It's just about us kind of letting our hair down, getting to know you on a little different level, and letting you know kind of who we are behind the scenes.
That's good. That's
Yeah, we have
fun.
a lot
I
of
like
fun with
that.
Yeah.
Because it's good to laugh too. Just
Yeah, and I mean, if you've been to Adam and my classes, you know that you know how we are in classes. If you've seen us at conferences or what have you, but most folks haven't just sat down to grab a bite or a cup of coffee with Adam and I and just visited with us as we are. We try to pretty much be the same guys in front of a group that we are one-on-one, and I think we largely are that. But the podcast is literally you're just sitting down and having coffee with us and throwing all caution to the wind. So we're having a lot of fun with it.
good. That's good. Well, so today we're talking about how to treat others in the workplace. When you look at your accomplishments, how did the simple act of treating others add to those accomplishments? I mean, how did that figure into what you were doing?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, Cherie. One of the things I tell people in classes a lot and when I speak to dispatchers is there are a lot of things that kept me up at night during my career, all through the stages of my career. And a lot of calls that I took that I couldn't stop thinking about, or calls that I hoped I did right, calls that I did do right, mistakes that I made, this, that, and the other, all the little pieces, parts of 911 just constantly overwhelmed me. But I started realizing as time started going by that I just didn't remember any of that. No one remembered any of that. Now, that's not to say that I didn't take great pride in trying to do the best work I could in that industry. Of course, I did. But the thing people remembered was how I treated them. It was never, hey, you remember that call you took 5 years ago? It was, hey, do you remember 5 years ago when I was outside crying and you just walked up and gave me a hug? I haven't forgotten that. So, I learned pretty quick in this industry that, yeah, you got to be perfect, and there are a lot of multitasking stuff that you got to do that you've never probably done before. But at the end of the day, how you treat people is the thing that resonates. It's the thing that matters. It's the thing that gets remembered. It's the thing that has the most impact, both individually and from a culture perspective. When I've talked to people in 911 centers whose culture isn't good, they never say it's because of technology, Kris, or it's because of our building, Kris. It's because people treat each other poorly. And so that's kind of the defining element of the classes that I teach and the talks that I give, is that we spend a lot of time talking about things in this industry that, to be frank, I'm not sure we can change. I mean, for example, and I know, Cherie, you started a while back as well as I did, which is odd given both of our extreme youth. But I started in 1994, and we were sweating a lot of the same issues in 94 that we're sweating in 2024. I mean, it's still not a job for everyone. We're still trying to figure out the best way to train. We're still trying to figure out the best people to hire. We're still trying to figure out how to impact the long hours, all that stuff. And that's important stuff, and we need to keep working on it. But we keep spending all our time on that stuff and not on the things that we can control right now, which is how do you treat other people? What is your attitude like at work? Do you, when you have a new person, take the time to introduce yourself, pat them on the back, tell them good job, bring them a soda on your way back from a break? These are the things that matter. And in an industry that demands so much that will never be for everyone, let's be honest, we're always going to have turnover in 911. We just are. If we can create an atmosphere through the way we control the way we treat each other, it will have an impact on the people who are impactable. So I feel like that element of my career, in fact, it was culminated at the end when I retired. They presented me with the Kris Inman Power of Positivity Award, which they have on the wall now, and they're giving that now yearly to an employee at 911 who exemplifies positivity. And I'm just incredibly touched by that. And I feel like that's the receipts of everything I talk about. Like you talk about bringing receipts. Well, there are my receipts. That they're showing you that the thing that I'll be remembered for won't be for decisions I made or the career laddering positions or any of that stuff. It's going to be the way I treated people. So, Cherie, I think, long story short, if that's possible now after my incredible rambling answer, that's the thing that I take the most pride in being remembered for, and I think we all should, because it's the thing that will last.
Well, given that, you started, you were the first person in your department that was promoted internally to director. So you already knew what the culture was like there. What did you do first in that promoted position?
Well, I followed an incredible leader and director named Zim Schwartz. And Zim remains to this day the single greatest leader I've ever worked for, the most motivating, the most caring. If you were just willing to open your eyes and ears, you would learn just a number of things from the way Zim went about her business every day. It's the first person I've ever worked for that my motivation was to not disappoint her, which is incredibly powerful motivation, and motivation I'd never had for any boss ever before. She was just a remarkable human being. So it was a unique opportunity to step into huge shoes to continue a strong culture that Zim literally built with her hands. So I certainly didn't come in and build any kind of culture. Zim had done 9 years worth of heavy work to get that done. So I had all sorts of plans to do this, that, and the other thing. And then right after I got promoted, COVID hit. So COVID took over my first year. It was all about COVID policy and how do we do this? What do we do? We created emergency plans for in case we had to evacuate the center, because if you remember early on in COVID, heck, we didn't even know how you got it initially. So all my grand plans were kind of shelved a little bit so that we could figure out how to deal with COVID. But I learned in dealing with COVID and how hard that was, that this was a great opportunity as well when the chips are down and when things are really hard to really lean into the culture that had already been built. So I just tried to, and didn't always succeed, but I always just tried to listen to my people, to give credence to their feedback so that they could see when they had feedback it actually was acted upon. Again, I tried very, very hard to spotlight all the great work they were doing and make it abundantly clear how great my people were. And I wanted my people to know how great they were, because sometimes you forget. So really, in the midst of all the COVID chaos, I don't mean to make it sound like only in Springfield did we encounter COVID, but in the midst of all that, I started learning that now is the time to lean into all the other things. And so we just tried to be as people-centered as we could be, as people-focused as we could be. You look back, there are a lot of things you wish you'd done more of, you'd done better, but I take pride in the fact that we were able to put our people first and let other people know just how great they are and were and are.
I knew when you got promoted. It's not like I forgot COVID, but I forgot that was COVID.
Haven't we all tried to forget COVID? I mean, for God's, just saying the word gives me a little PTSD. I'm done with it. I'm ready to put. I think we can all say that. But it was a challenging atmosphere in a shoulder to shoulder. And most dispatchers, Cherie, you think about it, are driven to come into work. Most of them, because they're like, if I don't show up to work, somebody maybe doesn't get the day off. So it was the hardest part for me was getting dispatchers to not come to work if they just had a stuffy nose. Right. Because most dispatchers come to work if they were carrying their head with them, because they knew what the circumstances were of not coming to work. So that was the hardest challenge, I think, was just to get people to rethink everything,
Yeah. Well, you have delivered sessions all over the country for groups. What message do you say when people are like, well, it's my boss's job to keep up the morale here? Like, what do you tell people? First of all, have you ever had anyone come up to you and say that?
Yeah, totally. I think we need to think in terms of, I think that when people think about morale, they think of this faceless, nameless group of people that must be changed in order for morale to be impacted. And I think a lot of us tend to devalue our own impact on morale. So I think we sometimes look to others to either fix it, we look to others as the cause of poor morale, and we very seldom take into consideration the power that we as individuals have to impact our morale. So what I try to share with people is this. Oftentimes, when it comes to morale, we set a bar right up here, and that bar suggests that we change people. In order for our morale to be better, we got to change the director. We've got to change these two negative people. Got a couple folks over here who aren't buying in. Got to change them too. But then I ask them, have you ever been in a personal relationship with the goal of changing that person? And if so, what was your success rate? Because if you're being honest, if you've ever thought, I can change this person, you know the answer is no, you absolutely can't. So there is no magic fix for morale. There's no magic button. There's no magic anything. But what we can do is reset the bar for success. The bar is not to change people. The bar is to change yourself. The bar is to understand what you can do. The bar is to understand that attitude belongs to you. It's yours to control. It's not anyone else's. Somebody once told me, Kris, your job as a leader is to create as much sunshine as you can for your people. Your job is not to drag them kicking and screaming into the sunshine. The people who see it will gravitate to it, and that is your audience. So if you've got a couple of negative folks who you're just desperately trying to change while everyone else sits over here, that's not your audience. Those people are not your audience. If you've got a director who's making life miserable for you, and I've worked for directors like that, not them, but I've worked for others like that, you just have to figure out a way to persevere or leave, and we learn to control the things that we could control. To have control of our own attitudes, to have control of the things that we impact, not worry about somebody else. So while there's no magic fix, and while negative people can be a constant strain and can conspire to make choosing a good attitude a difficult trek to be certain, it's still up to you. What are you going to bring in today? What attitude are you going to choose when you come to work today? You're going to let those 2 or 3 people become the reason that you choose a poor attitude? I'm not. I'm not going to do that. If they want to be that way, that's okay. I'll still find out about them. I'll still talk to them, and I'll still thank them for their contributions. But after that, I'm done. That's not my audience. If you're interested in the sunshine I'm creating, you're my audience. Come here and enjoy it. Let's really celebrate each other. Let's take the oxygen away from the folks who would suck it all out and create their own agenda, because they only create an agenda we allow them to create. They don't get to do that unless we give them the power to do that. So that's what I tell people. Don't wait for somebody else to fix it. Don't sit and bemoan the fact that you, quote unquote, have no power to do anything. Sure you do. Choose a good attitude. Come in there with that good attitude. Watch the people around you join in that good attitude, and just make the best of what you got there. Because it'll work. Good always outweighs bad. It always does. It always does. And I'm not coming from a place of naivete. I worked in a communication center for almost 30 years. I know what I'm talking about here, and that is, stop letting negative people rue the day. Stop letting them be the headline. They don't get that anymore. It's you. You make the choice. And you pick the attitude. That's what it's about.
You're talking about bosses too. I mean, when you're talking about, because on the flip side of that, the bosses say, "Oh well, I can't do that." You know, it's the employees. They need to create the positive atmosphere. I can't do it by myself. Which actually, it's true. One person can't do it. I mean, it does take a whole center working together, but I like what you said, bring the positive, bring the good energy.
I mean, it starts with one person. Good
Right.
atmospheres, good work culture starts with one person. It's not a wave that suddenly is multiple people. And I worked for almost 12 years for a boss who was one of the smartest people in 911 I've ever met, but was so driven by punitive policies that if you showed up with the wrong color of socks, you got written up. If you showed up without a belt on, you got written up. If you showed up for little minor things, you constantly got written up or threatened to be written up. And you know what? Despite that, and it was oppressive, on the floor of that dispatch center, we had an awesome culture. It was, we would laugh and do incredible work, and it was a great place to be. Some days I couldn't wait to come to work, even in spite of that. And I think it's there that I learned, some things I can't change. Some people I can't impact. And the longer you try to impact the unimpactable, the more frustrated you're going to get, and the worse things will be. It started to dawn on me that I can control me. That is my choice. And in controlling me, somebody sees the way I act and they gravitate toward it, and then somebody else does too, and somebody else does too. And the next thing you know, we got a nice pack of good attitudes going on here who, frankly, don't really care about the bad attitudes. We just don't. And we took the oxygen away from them. And in so doing, they didn't get to dictate things anymore. They want to choose that dark path and sit over there and poo-poo everything that's going on. Great. You can make a whole career out of doing that. I've worked with people that have. I know you probably have. And if 911 folks are watching this or listening to this, they have too. So what? It's just time to stop letting them dictate policy and letting them dictate the mood of the room. They don't get to do that unless we let them do that. So I sort of learned that the hard way and started to realize that we can still make our own atmosphere no matter how hard it is. And we did. And it was great. And we were better for it.
So when we talk about communication styles and conflict styles, there are different types of conflict styles. I think you talk about that in one of your classes. Mm-hmm. What are the different conflict styles? And I'll have a follow-up question to that.
Sure. I think there are a lot. You can label conflict a lot of different ways, but I think there are some specific types of conflict that we see in 911. And if you live in an area of the country where you get severe weather, I always think of this analogy. Where I live, we get tornadoes, or we get the threat of them a lot. And oftentimes you'll get tornado warnings, which means a tornado has been spotted or indicated by radar, hey, there's a tornado. But more often we get tornado watches, which means conditions are favorable for the development of tornadoes. I like to think, I don't like to, but I think it's true that every 911 center is in a constant state of conflict watch. Doesn't mean there is going to be conflict, but it does mean conditions are definitely favorable for it to develop. And you think about it, Cherie, I mean, the long hours and the stress and the perfection and all the things we've already talked about, working shoulder to shoulder in an atmosphere that's so interdependent. Like you can't be really good at what you do unless the person next to you shows up and is competent at what they do. So unlike an insurance office where everybody's in a different cubicle and nobody's impacted by anything, your job has everything to do with the worst person on your shift. And I mean, if they're not putting good call comments in, your dispatchers are going to be tough. So that all being said, it creates a ripe atmosphere for conflict. And I think we see, as a result of that, interdependence conflict that occurs a lot in 911, where we get into conflict because of our dependence on each other and our expectations of each other. And I think that when a coworker fails to show up to work and they call out sick in suspicious ways, every Friday they call out sick, then they start blowing some of the trust that we have to have in them, and conflict starts to bubble up from that. I think we see working style conflict, where we get upset by the way someone is or isn't doing something that we think they maybe should do a little bit different way. We weren't trained like that. Why are they doing it the wrong way? Certainly leadership conflict is something that we see where a leader is leading in a way that isn't working out for you. They're not open to your ideas. They don't hear your feedback. They're not helping you in ways or coaching you in ways that you feel like they should. And then finally, I think the one that is really destructive potentially is personality conflict. Because when you're working shoulder to shoulder with folks who you're required to be with that long, you're going to have, as you tend to do with family, little issues that just drive you crazy about them, that aren't even necessarily based in logic. You just don't like the way their face looks after you've worked with them for a while. And it can be as silly as that. But things where when we're so emotional and so stressed, well, I'm not talking to them anymore, and you start holding grudges, and God forbid, maybe there's a love triangle involved. I don't even want to get started on that. But if you've worked in 911 for any period of time, you've probably seen something like that too. But personality conflict, I think, is the most potentially destructive, the hardest to stop, the least logical, and therefore the least easy to deal with. But we have to be aware of all these different conflict types, and that we are always in a potential state of it, and it's not always dictated by logic or sense. And we have to be ready as leaders to step in and mediate where needed, and to be prepared for that. I've seen comm centers, I worked in one back in the 90s where there was some horrific conflict between a couple supervisors, and it almost tore the entire department apart. And my memory of management back then was, of course, they were aware of it, but they didn't do anything about it. So, I'm a big proponent in you don't have to have a title to have power in your center, but there are some things our leaders have to do when it comes to conflict, in particular, deep-seated personality conflict. It's going to take somebody to step in and mediate that conflict, or it could spin right out of control. But if you've done this for any period of time, you've probably seen elements of each type that we discussed here for sure.
So that really brings me into my next question. When there's the conflict from shift to shift, so you have one shift that does things this way and one shift that does things this way, and then we already talked about the overtime.
Yeah.
The 50 to 56 hours a week that you're going to be expected to work. And obviously that's going to be on a different shift. So, oh, well, I don't like them because they do things different. And that's
Yeah.
not the way we do things on this shift. How would you suggest you even start as a leader to develop a kinder atmosphere that's going to extend across those shifts and the longevity? Well, this is the way I've done it, and I've been here 20 years.
There's no two ways, and you know this as well as anybody, Cherie, all your years in the industry. There's no two ways around the fact that sometimes there are just going to be cultural differences on your shifts. This is not to excuse poor behavior, not doing that. But to think that, your night shifters and your day shifters are going to fundamentally be the same, they're not. And again, I'm painting with a broad brush here, but a lot of times your day shifters are your seasoned veterans. They've been doing this for a long time. This is just a job to them, whereas your night shifters, not always here, but most of the time, tend to veer toward the younger with regard to their service time and their thought processes about the job. So there are going to definitely be some differences. But having said that, to just leave it there and let that be an excuse for poor behavior is where I think we as leaders can start to err. So I have always suggested that we make it abundantly crystal clear in our policy what our behavioral expectations are. So I think in policies in 911 centers, we see a lot of clear things in SOPs about the way equipment is operated and about sick leave policies and things like that, but we don't always see behavioral expectations written out clearly. So I think the first thing that we have to do in a multi-shift, 24/7, 365 operation is leave nothing to chance. Just make it abundantly clear in policy. Here, behaviorally speaking, is what my expectations are of you. And that's great. But that doesn't work unless you then enforce it and model it. So your supervisors, your management has to model that behavior. You can't have a great SOP about behavioral expectations and have your supervisors leading the charge on all the gossiping out on the floor, and sometimes that happens. So you've got to get buy-in from all your folks all the way down to supervisor level and make sure that we are, in fact, modeling the behavior, and then we have to enforce it. So that's another mistake I think leaders at 911 centers make is they'll write up a beautiful policy and it just sits there in the policy manual gathering dust over the course of years, never to be seen or used again. It's great if we put a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit outside a school, but if there's never a cop running radar, people are going to speed all through there. They're going to do 50, 60, 70 and just say the hell with it. Nobody's enforcing it. So there has to be an enforcement mechanism. And I'm not talking about bringing down the iron hammer of justice. I'm just making it clear to the majority of your folks. If you're in a comm center in a leadership position, the majority of your folks are waiting for you to do something about the handful of folks who aren't on board. And that thing you can do is make clear what your expectations are and enforce them. You can't change all the differences from the shifts and some of the cultural differences in the way they see the world and the job. Sometimes you just can't change those things. But if you keep them all held to the same line of behavioral expectation, that's where you can start to see success. But it takes a lot of work. It's not as easy as just saying it. You have to put your money where your mouth is.
And I'm glad you said it that way because I feel like one of the challenges we have is how to address conflicts in relationships. And we can write the policy, we can have the policy, we can enforce the policy, but before we can enforce it, I think we sometimes miss that training step in a policy. We need to train on the policy also. But what kind of skills do you think that we can encourage people to enhance within themselves to be more confident and more productive? And so one of the things I like to do when we're doing podcasts is I like to give people something that they can work at home, not only in the workplace, just to develop them as inside, all the way around a healthy person. So what kind of skills can they take away from this today? I mean, it's just a little blip, but what would you say?
Well, I think we're in a perfect time to consider this, what I'm about to mention, with politics and holidays, and I'm not going to so-and-so's house because of how they voted, and I'm shutting this person out of my, we're in that mode right now. Everybody's a little raw because of what politics have become. So I think that both for work purposes and for home purposes, trying to get from a place of debate, which is sort of human nature to be, like we want to debate things. And when we debate things, we don't want to just prove our side. We want to prove our side to the detriment of the other. In other words, I win and you lose. I'm right and you're wrong. I'm good and you're evil. So this debate mode that we tend to get in, and you see it sometimes on social media for people who are foolish enough to get on social media and argue politics, which I've never done. I will confess to grabbing some popcorn and watching it, but I don't ever take part in it because it's ludicrous, because you're not ever going to change anybody's mind in this kind of debate. You're never going to go on Facebook and change somebody's mind politically. You're never going to get into a back and forth with someone in which your ultimate goal is to prove them wrong and you right, and to vanquish them and defeat them as you raise your hands in ultimate victory. So that kind of debate is sort of where we are by default. I suggest that we all work toward, and I know it feels like a picture-perfect place like Oz that we can never achieve, but it's a place of dialogue. We get away from debate, we move toward dialogue, where we come to the understanding, as hard as it is, that to have a disagreement with someone else is okay. They may think different than us. We don't stand to be harmed by their opinion. That it's okay to let someone make a point that we don't agree with without having to stomp on that point and hurt them in some way. That we create a scenario in which we can together embrace the idea that we can both be heading for the same destination and take wildly different roads to get there. And it's okay. Instead of arguing about the right road to take, when in fact we all want to go to the same place. And that's true at home. It's true at work. It's true in our work and personal relationships oftentimes. So that would be what I would suggest. And man, that's a tall order to ask. I'm giving you a giant pill to swallow here without any water to wash it down with. But I think that it's a noble goal for us all to work toward. And I think on some level, we do that at work. We have to do that at work. We can't just be in a constant state of squabble. We wouldn't get anything done. Sometimes we do it while we hold our breath. But I think that if we can think of debate as no true winner and think of dialogue as a way for us all to win, then that is a most noble goal for us all to aspire to. Say your piece and then listen to hear as opposed to listening to reply. A tall order, but one worth undertaking.
That's really great advice. I can think of, half a dozen applications I can use that on, just, in my own personal life. The top one in my head is, raising teenagers.
I'm sure, yeah.
Just because they're younger doesn't mean they don't have something to add, right?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's true of, sometimes we sort of dehumanize our brand new employees.
Yes.
They don't have any experience. Well, I'm not going to listen to them. They haven't earned their way yet. Well, we're still hiring adults, although God knows they're looking so much younger than they used to, but they're still adults, and they still bring something to the table. And honestly, when you think about it, Cherie, back to the difficult days of training, oftentimes the hardest part of training, and the training itself is pretty brutal, but was getting accepted, getting supported, being quote unquote a part of it. And so if we can be more inclusive with our new folks, be more supportive, bring them on board. If we're having discussions, grab their chair and pull them into the discussion, make them feel like they're part of it and like they're worthwhile. That can go a long way toward making them feel like they're supported from an early stage of the game. And I think, again, it's just in the way you treat people. You'll notice, again, and not on purpose, but we've tied all this back to what we're here to talk about today, and that is ultimately the way we treat each other. That's what everything comes down to. And, as we get older, Cherie, you and I, here in our late 20s, we don't have, as I mentioned earlier, the bastion of wisdom, but we know what we know about ourselves probably better than we did 20 years ago. And I think we start to learn, when I treat somebody well, especially when I'm in a position of authority, it reverberates in really great ways. It changes things. It invites different things that are good. So I think, again, it all ties back to how are you treating your coworkers, the people that work for you, the people that work with you? How are you treating your kids and your spouse and your friends when you leave the center or your job? That's what it's about. And long after you and I are gone, they're not going to remember this podcast. They're not going to remember anything much more than, you know what, I met Cherie once and she could not have been sweeter. That's what matters when it's all said and done.
Right. Right. That impression.
Absolutely. That's the thing that reverberates. That's the thing that matters. That's the thing that carries on.
I have one more question for you. Just a quick one.
Yeah.
I was really interested because, I did budgeting too. I know one of the things that occurred during your tenure as a director was that you had a budget surplus, nearly 5 times the required level. And as a director, I was able to experience that as well. But we were required to send that money back to our customers, to the cities that we were contracted with, that we served. What did you do with your surplus?
Well, I'm glad you asked that quick because it's such an interesting scenario to be in, and not that many people have been in a big budget scenario like that and kind of know, what that feels like. So I'm naturally fiscally conservative. And so my thought process was always to have money left over. And so we worked really hard to do that. We were fortunate that tax revenues were in a good quality place. You can pat directors and executives on the back all day for a surplus like that. But if tax revenue isn't strong, you don't care who you are as a director, you're not going to have a surplus. So first and foremost, that was not because of some great talent that I have. It came from great tax surpluses. But ultimately, as we started to pile up what they call our rainy day fund, my county commissioners contacted me and they were like, hey, just so you know, this is awesome that you have this much money, but also you can't really have this much money. I mean, we don't want to send a message to the taxpayers that the tax you're paying for 911 services is such that we're just sitting on piles of cash. So they encouraged Mr. Fiscally Conservative to spend it on needs, make a big list of your needs and let's get them knocked down. So that's what we did. We just got together and we started looking at, okay, what can we upgrade? What do we need to upgrade? We completely upgraded our training room where we did all of our CAD training and turned it into a state-of-the-art facility. We completely redid our carpeting and all of our furniture in the entire ops center. I mean, it was absolutely beautiful state-of-the-art stuff. Pain in the butt during the transition to it, I promise you that, and I left before it was quite over. So I tip my cap to the folks that carried that ball through the end zone. But yeah, we completely upgraded all of our infrastructure. We built a phenomenal gym for our employees. The biggest, I think, the biggest obstacle for folks in public safety, certainly in 911, is stress. So we built a beautiful gym on site. So during a break or before or after shift, they could go in there and have a world-class workout. I mean, we had top-of-the-line equipment. So what we did was, instead of just focusing on not spending money and being satisfied with that, I needed a little kick in the backside from some of the purse handlers that said, hey, let's get some stuff taken care of. And that's exactly what we did. So we just started taking care of our needs and making sure that we were where we wanted to be, making sure that the things we were upgrading or changing or building would be there 20 years from now. And I think that's what we did. Having said that, I still left my predecessor with a sizable chunk of change. But as you know, Cherie, in this industry, what goes up must come down. So you may have 2, 3, 4 years of great tax money, and then another 4 or 5 years right after that of below budget expectations. So having a little extra dough in that kitty, if you will, is important, but not to the point that you've got so much of it that you're neglecting the things you need to take care of. So it just required a mindset change for me, and then we started taking care of business.
Right, and I like that you were able to turn that back around and show the dispatchers, look, we're gonna do this for you because what you do is important.
Yeah, I mean, if you're going to sit there, as we talked about, 55 hours a week, every day or every week, all year, every year, and we hope to keep you there long term, despite all that, then we have a duty to you, as best we can from a leadership perspective, to improve or make more comfortable the fact that you are here more than you're at home. And it's not a perfect world. We can't please everybody, and maybe there were other things we could have or should have done, certainly. But you do the best you can, and you make it as comfortable as you can for folks who need it to be as comfortable as it can be, for sure.
Great. Well, thank you, Kris, for joining us today. for our audience, I just want to take a moment to really encourage you to keep yourself healthy. Bring that joy, bring that healthy attitude with you to work, and others will come to you. Be sure to check out the courses we offer in our apprentice program, and also check out the new THD Talks on the Healthy Dispatcher podcast and tidbits. Thanks, Kris, again for joining us. Bye, everyone. Have a great day.